All right. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for coming coming to the what we call our Common Core forum. My name is Matt Wills, and I'm the communications director for the Missouri Republican Party. Our executive director, Shane Scholler, was scheduled to be here, but he is actually still in our state committee meeting, and will join us as soon as that adjourns. But I wanted to just quickly get started, and I'm not going to introduce our panelists. I'm going to have them introduce themselves. They know better about themselves than obviously anybody else would. So I'd like to first start with Dr. Mary Byrne to get things started.
Yeah. My question is, do I read the opening remarks or just do the bio?
Just introduce yourself, and then we'll go to that end.
I am Dr. Mary Byrne. I'm a co-founder of Missouri Coalition Against Common Core. I have an MED in instructional design. It's it's considered a professional master's at Columbia University, where I received that degree. So I am familiar with the Tyler model of aligning curriculum, assessment, and content of classroom instruction with standards. And it's very key to know that they're not unrelated. They are integrally related in that model. And the reason I emphasize that is because I just came from a hearing with legislators earlier in the week, and they're being told, well, you can choose your own curriculum. Well, if you know the Tyler model, the curriculum is integral to the standards and the tests. So it's not just a curriculum, okay? So I wanted to clarify that. But my doctorate is in special education. Again, that was from Columbia University in New York. I was a special educator of the deaf, but when I went for the doctorate, I also studied early childhood and education administration, not because I wanted to become an administrator, but because I wanted to understand them. I wanted to know the rules they had to play by and kind of get an empathy for what this clash was going on between special education and administration. And so I'll tell you a story about my husband and how I came to understand administrators. He was a director of shareholder relations for Texaco. And we had a little tag on our door to the house that said middle manager's prayer. And when you turn it over, it says middle managers don't have a prayer. And so those years I studied for the doctorate and took those administration courses, I understood why. Okay, so I want you to know that I'm very empathetic to what school administrators do in their daily jobs, how they have to relate to the public, and how it's very difficult to please all people all the time. That said, I moved from being a classroom teacher to higher education. So most of my career is spent in educating teachers on how to be teachers. And I am very empathetic with them as well. I'm not sure I want you to know I'm beholden to no one. I pay no dues that makes me think the thoughts I have to think. I am semi-retired, so I'm an adjunct. I'm not limited by what the university reputation might be, because if I choose to say what I think, I can leave. And that is a wonderful freedom I'm trying to protect for everybody. A freedom of thought and a freedom to speak the truth. And that's why we're here.
My name is Ann Gassel. I am a stay-at-home mom of 2 children in the public school system in Rockwood. It's West County, St. Louis, for those of you who don't know the geography up there. I have been interested in Common Core for 2.5 years, since I heard one of the Alabama State School Board members talk about this thing called Common Core that she saw, and there was a lot of money going into promoting it by a lot of private interests. I've always been interested in Common Core from the structural standpoint, and that is my greatest concern about Common Core, is that ultimately it will require a change in governance for what we're doing in education. I want freedom for my teachers, I want freedom for my kids, And I want the public to continue to have a voice in education, and I see this as a major step to take away that voice of the public in their education. So that's my point.
I am Gretchen Logue. I am from St. Louis County. I live in Glendale. I became interested in Common Core about 4 years ago when I read our Race to the Top proposal that Commissioner Nicastro wrote. We were applying for Race to the Top funding. In that application, there was the adoption of Common Core or common set of standards at that time to be considered for grant money, which we did not receive. What caught my attention was on page 10. And she was saying that her vision for Missouri education reform was based on the Cass Sunstein, some of you know who he is, based on his book that he co-authored, Nudge, in which she decided that we needed choice architects to nudge Missouri into the correct direction for educational reform. And I thought at that time, I don't think we need choice architects. I think we have some pretty smart people here in Missouri, and I think that's our state, it's our state sovereignty to be able to direct and develop our own educational policy in this state. That got me hooked. And the second thing is I am a mother of a young man who has a cochlear implant. He learned at a different pace. He did not receive a common education. So that was my second kind of hook into the Common Core movement. I started Missouri Education Watchdog about 3.5 years ago. I am a co-founder of another site, Truth in American Education. There were 4 of us nationally who founded that. And then I am with these ladies at Missouri Coalition Against Common Core. I am a mom. I am a taxpayer. I don't have any educational degrees. I do have a degree in English, but I don't have any educational degree. However, I am very concerned about having kids have a common set of standards and a common way of learning. And I know especially the special education parents from around the nation are very concerned about Common Core state standards.
Well, good morning. My name's Kent Medlin. I am superintendent of schools at Willard, which is a small town 4 miles north of Springfield. Has 4,400 students. I have been there for 11 years. I've been in public education for 27. During that time, I've spent many years as a building principal, understanding the concepts of teaching and learning at that level. I spent time in the classroom as a high school chemistry teacher, coach. About any type of experience that occurs in public schools, I've been around it, been through it, or have experienced it, one or the other. As far as Common Core, really, where my goal is this morning is to focus on student learning. What we are trying to find at Willard and in Southwest Missouri is ways to move student learning forward. How do we figure out how to move our schools from the current level of instruction to a 21st century level of instruction? How do we make things better for students? That's what we're all about. Now, as far as Common Core, I'm prepared to have conversation about that also and want to. But my most important intention this morning is to share some positive things that are happening in our public schools that are exciting and helping them to move forward with 21st century education.
Good morning. My name is Danielle Selenrick, and I am the Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment at Willard Schools. I have been in public education for 24 years. 19 of those years I have spent training teachers in those areas as well, working closely with districts and administrators in implementing best practices that are research-based. My role in Willard is to work with our students pre-K through 12 for college and career readiness, to also work closely with our special education students to make sure that they are being served in the best possible ways, to make sure that all needs are being met for all of our students. My focus today and what I would like to share with you is a little bit about the best practices that are occurring in Willard and many schools across our state and also across our nation in this collaborative process, and to also share with you the many things that we are in control of and that we make the decisions about what we put in front of our students to push them forward into the 21st century. So I look forward to a professional and rigorous conversation today and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Good morning. Craig Carson, Ozark Assistant Superintendent. Good to be with you. I've already seen several old friends that I've helped on their campaigns, and it's nice to be in Republican territory for a while, unless you start throwing things, and then I might say differently. Just teasing. I have a couple of bachelor's degrees from here in Springfield. I have a bachelor's degree in pastoral theology. I have a bachelor's degree in vocal music. And then I went to MSU, and I have a master's in secondary ed. And then I have my ed specialist degree and my doctorate from St. Louis University. My focus over my 18 years in education, really for the last 12 years, has been how kids learn and how we engage them in the classroom. And so today I hope I bring a piece of that. I have a very high interest in how Ozark children learn and how Missouri students learn, because I've got 4 kids in the system from 1st grade to 10th grade. And it's really important for me to make sure that they're learning the right standards and to make sure that no one is pushing in on them anything that, as a parent, that would give me some alarm. And so I look forward to our conversation today. I also, another large hat that I wear, I'm a co-pastor of a church in Ozark. And so that is the other lens I guess I'm looking at this in. A lot of my parishioners are always asking me, what about Common Core? What are we doing? How are we doing it? So a lot of what I'll talk to you is the same things I say to them when they ask me as their pastor. I guess for the final thing, I'm an avid fisherman, hunter, gardener, and in my spare time, I'm an adjunct professor for Lindenwood University in curriculum and assessment and instruction. So thank you for having us here today. We're excited about that.
All right. I think it's very important to note before we get started with actually questions and stuff like that, as a party, in having this forum available for an education purpose, we wanted to be able to present both sides so everybody can have an objective view of what exactly is going on with this policy that could be coming down the line and is coming down the line. That as we move forward, we can be better educated ourselves and understand a little more about what's going on. So having said that, it is my goal to there were a couple of questions I think that were submitted ahead of time that we'll go ahead and get started with, and then obviously we'll kick it out to the crowd to have some questions from you folks of things that we've not covered beforehand. The first question that really had come up was what conditions existed before Common Core that prevented teachers from teaching the things they say Common Core lets them teach? And at the interest of fairness, with you guys starting off the introduction, Dr. Medlin, I'll kick it off for you.
So the conditions that we had in our current standards and what you see with the Common Core standards, it's really a matter of the amount of rigor that it's asking us to do. When the superintendent of schools and I and our committee looked at the two, can't hear. That better? Perfect. Thank you very much. Sorry. Now I don't have to get red-faced. That's nice. So the conditions of the Common Core, what existed beforehand, we've had standards in Missouri for a few decades. And the difference between Common Core and what our standards were, is a matter of some rearranging. What we had in Missouri and what the Common Core has with the new Missouri Learning Standards, there is a rearranging of where some of the standards lie. Then there are some, at the earlier levels, it's really pushing us toward the depth that we teach kids in mathematics and how we really focus on the foundation instead of being an inch wide, inch deep and a mile wide. It's really asking us to go in depth so our kids have a good number sense before we add the next pieces onto that. So when we're looking at what does one do the other one doesn't, it does change. Common Core changes the arrangement of them. It really doesn't add new concepts into our standards that we haven't had in the past. It does give us in ELA or language arts, it gives us more of a focus on making sure we have a good balance, and we help all those content area teachers who teach science and who teach social studies and teach music and all those other people, that they're helping our kids really understand how to read informational text. And so it gives us a further degree of understanding that the other standards in the past haven't. They've assumed we were going to do that, and this has given us more of that. But locally, before this and after this, we determine what we're doing. And so what's it forced us to do, it gives us kind of a difference of the emphasis we're putting on a few areas.
I'd like to add just a bit. Each school district had to decide and make a judgment call if they utilize this as an opportunity or if they look at this as something that's being done to them. Basically, high-quality districts, in my opinion, are looking at this as an opportunity. Anytime that change happens and you dive deep into your curriculum, basically what happens is you start to analyze it not only at the administrative level but all the way down to the teacher level. Our teachers at Willard have been heavily invested into this entire project. And anytime that occurs, we have great discussion as far as what is actually in the curriculum, what is actually in the standards, what is in the standards, how do we fashion the curriculum in order to satisfy those standards at a local level. So actually, in our district, we have used it as a great opportunity to refashion student learning over the last 2 to 3 years, looking at language arts and math in depth in order to provide the most 21st century instruction, looking at that model moving to the future. So using it as an opportunity, I think that gives us the ability to improve. That change process helps us, and we've grabbed a hold of that and engaged it.
Dr. Burr?
What we passed out prior to our beginning to speak was a handout. And on one side of the handout, you'll find at the top, Council of Chief State School Officers in the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices. The question was, what prevented you from doing these desirable activities before? The answer was nothing. Prior to the Common Core standards, all states had the ability to review the standards of other states. In fact, because they were state developed, they were in public domain. The federal government cannot hold a copyright. States cannot hold a copyright because they're government entities, and the products were developed by public money. The Common Core standards are copyrighted to the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. What you have, and I put this in writing in case you've heard about the tinfoil hats. I don't wear one. All right? I've done my research. This is a government document. You'll find it on the Columbia Tribune website because it was the PDF of Jay Nixon signing this agreement with the National Governors Association was posted on the Columbia Tribune website. And what you see in the underline is American Diploma Project. That was a project that was started by Achieve Inc., which is a spin-off of the National Governors Association. In 2004, they began a project called the American Diploma Project. They developed the math and English standards for high school based on the workforce projections for 5 states. That's the research they're talking about, folks. Workforce projections. Missouri was not one of those 5 states. What happened was economists decided what jobs were likely to be growth jobs in those states, review the transcripts of people in those jobs, and then figure out what they needed in math and English to perform those jobs. My question is, if we're actually looking for 21st century learning, how do you make projections on the jobs that are going to exist 10 years from now? Did anyone tell Mark Zuckerman before he created Facebook? Okay? The reason I have pointed this out in the agreement Nixon signed are several. One is that he signed it unilaterally. This was before the State Board of Education. So the question is, was this collaborative? No. Nixon made that decision as a member of the Governors Association. All right, then at the bottom, what you have is a description from a statement made by Mike Cohen. He used to be the Assistant Secretary of Education under the Clinton administration. He is now president of Achieve. Mike Cohen stated, the Common Core is the American Diploma Project. I put the websites there so you can go look for it yourself. Okay? So this is actually part of standards that were developed in another project from a Washington, D.C. based organization starting in 2004. 35 states had signed on. They were called the American Diploma Network. Missouri was not one of them. So we did not participate in the research. We were not a participant in the American Diploma Project voluntarily as a state. But when Nixon signed this agreement, he agreed that Missouri would adopt the American Diploma Project as the seed document for the rest of the Corps. Remember, it was only high school. What had to happen then was a downward extension of those courses in math and English to the kindergarten level. There were no early childhood specialists on the team, the work team assigned by Washington, D.C. based organization. There was no special educator on that team. So what we have are developmentally inappropriate standards for the lower grades, asking them to do high-level abstract thinking when actually stacked math was adequate for our nation for several decades. Then what you have on the back of that form is his signature on an application for state fiscal stabilization funds. Those were American Reinvestment Recovery Act funds given to the U.S. Department of Ed and then distributed to governors for agreeing to 4 assurances. Adoption of the Common Core was one of those assurances. In addition, and you've got the list right there, the standards, the assessments aligned to them, and enhancement of the longitudinal data system, which is another data collection system that schools are collecting. Right now, Desi will tell you it's 61 data points. That's great. There exists a national data model of 400 data points. And if it is not the intent of the government to collect more data points, why do the fields exist? So you see, this was not voluntary in terms of our population rising up and saying, we want to be like everybody else. We would prefer that corporations who fund these standards tell us what to put in them rather than have sovereignty over our own education system. That's my concern. Okay? Government entities don't own copyrights, private entities do. And that, if regardless of the quality of the standards, we have given up sovereignty over our education when we signed on to copyrighted standards.
I'll just echo a little bit of what Mary said. We had this ability before. It's written into our statute that the local school district is supposed to set the curriculum. The state can set a limited number of standards. We had the Show Me standards, and I heard somebody over there say that actually this doesn't really add a whole lot of new concepts. So you have to wonder why everybody's jumping up and down if these new standards don't add a whole bunch of new concepts. All they've done is rearrange a few things, and I would question then They move a lot of rigor, they love this word, rigor, down to the early grades. There was a letter signed by 500 early childhood education experts saying we have grave concern about these standards. And in that letter, it said there is no research to support that this level of rigor and these types of standards in the early grades will have any impact on student college or career readiness. So there aren't research-based. There was no support to say that we're heading in the right direction. They also comment on this new focus on informational text, and we have to teach kids how to read informational text. Informational texts are meant to be self-explanatory. They are meant to explain to the audience exactly what the concept is that they're trying to come across, unlike the rich diversity of our classical literature, which really requires kids to think and to analyze and that sort of thing. So what we had before was, in fact, greater critical thinking, greater depth of reading amongst our kids, and now we're focusing on something else, and this is supposed to be an improvement. This is supposed to be better than what we have before. I know in my district, a big part of the problem with Common Core is the implementation is not even, and I'm sure Willard has got great implementation because they've sat in on most of the work groups, but their experience, like diet pills, is not typical of all users. My district just recently sent around a survey to the parents about our social studies curriculum because they are in the process of updating that. The entire survey consisted of the district telling us what they intend to teach and asking us if they did a good job at teaching that. Not asking us if we liked teaching that, if we wanted to teach that, wanted them to teach that. In the early grade standards, there is a kindergarten standard that says, with adult supervision, the children will take critique from their peers on their writing and alter their writing in response to their peers. We spend a lot of time as parents telling our children, don't listen to silly Susie. She's an immature child. It doesn't matter what she said. Sticks and stones. Now we have the school system teaching our children to pay attention to what Susie says and change what you do in response to what Susie said. I don't think that this is an improvement. I don't think this is better parent involvement. I don't think it's better than what we had before.
I think they've covered it very well. There is only one thing that I would like to highlight is the implementing of best practices that are research-based. That is what we want our educators to do. However, these standards are not based on best practices. They were never field tested, and they are not research-based. When the standards were first sold to the people who started finding out about them, that they were internationally benchmarked. For 2.5 years, people have been asking these private organizations, how are they internationally benchmarked and from what countries? That claim has been withdrawn because they aren't. So what we are saying, the people that are concerned about Common Core, is that if you are going to use standards, make sure they are research-based and based on best practices, which these are not.
All right. I know you had mentioned in your opening I think it was the Race to the Top grant, and that takes us to the next question. Given that Missouri was not awarded a Race to the Top grant, what resources are districts using to pay for the Race to the Top money that is not there?
The districts have repeatedly asked DESE for information about the cost of these implementation, and basically have gotten crickets for answers. I've sat in with meetings with superintendents who've said, well, we really wish DESE would tell us more. We don't know what our costs are going to be. We do know what is coming, what is looming with the tests being online tests and the requirement for not only the hardware, but the broadband and the support for all of that. $1 spent on a computer today is not, you're not done. That's not an investment that you can walk away from. Industry guidelines say for every $1 you spend on hardware, count on $1 for maintenance. So this becomes a new permanent high-level line item in all of our local district budgets. If we have to have computers for all of the assessments, and if the cry is, well, we all have to get computers anyway because we're going to be doing all of our lesson plans online. I do kind of look at our teachers and say, are you listening? They're going to be doing all of the lesson plans online. I want to have a teacher teach my kid, not a computer. The big problem is we haven't gotten cost information. We've been trying to ask for a year. That was the legislation we had last year. Senator Lamping's SB 210 said, can DESE at least supply us with cost information? It's just a big question mark right now.
Dr. Medlin, sorry. Dr. Medlin, did you want to respond? Or
Yes, just briefly. Competitive grants definitely are not uncommon to K-12. That's the world that we live in. Do I like the fact that we are currently underfunded at the state level? Absolutely not. And do I like to compete for money? Absolutely not. Unfortunately, it is the world that we live in. With the Race to the Top grant, one of the things that I think Missouri did well right at the beginning is not automatically chase money. Now, they can be criticized that just by signing on, that's what the end result was. But I think there was a clear vetting process prior to that occurring. That happened with districts, that happened with superintendents, that happened throughout the state to say, is this an opportunity for us that we can move forward? Basically, several things had to be satisfied, several criteria had to be satisfied before the decision was made to pursue that. But once again, I look at the opportunity for student learning. And is the Race to the Top grant, number one, the amount of money that was generated through the Race to the Top grant is not going to solve educational problems whatsoever throughout the nation. It's not. Educational problems throughout the nation is going to have to be solved at the local level and at the state level. That's where it's supposed to be solved. However, we haven't been able to solve those problems, so we have to find other ways to do it. And with that, we have had situations where we look to the federal government. We do that with special education. Special education is funded clearly at the federal level. If we didn't have that funding, then there would be greater burden on the state, and honestly, I would question as a special ed parent where that money would come from. So, bottom line with Race to the Top, I think it is part of this discussion, but once again, the vetting process is, can we utilize Common Core as an opportunity to improve student learning? And I think that answer is yes. It's dependent upon one thing, though, the local district. If the local district chooses to do nothing, then that's what they get out of this process, is nothing. If the local district chooses to use this as an opportunity to expand, grow, improve, and seek greater learning for their students and abilities to learn, improve their professional development at the local level, then they can improve their district. And that is what the public educators are all about. How do we help student learning and drive that forward? And I agree with Dr. Byrne and others that is clearly done at the local level. We're using this as an opportunity.
A couple of the things that I would like to address is, the vetting process of any type of a process such as this. And I do have to respectfully disagree that there was no research done around the Common Core state standards or no local input. I personally had 2 opportunities to look at drafts of the Common Core document prior to the final version being created and provide feedback on that document. As far as research, if you look in the appendices of the actual document, you can see all the different research studies, all the different pieces that they took into account for looking at best practices internationally, nationally, with many entities and groups that are unburdened by any kind of connections to anything governmental. So that information is there for you to see. When we're talking about standards and vetting standards, we have never field tested standards. We field test the assessment of those standards. And that process has gone on, and districts across the state have had opportunities to look at what this is going to be and to give feedback and to say we don't agree with what that looks like. We think it would be better articulated in this manner. And as far as having the opportunity to look at this through the lens of what the technological component would be, as Dr. Medlin said, this is an opportunity for districts to improve practice. And the fact that a district may or may not ask teachers to have online lesson plans is irrelevant to the discussion, because it doesn't mean that the teachers are going to be allowing computers to teach their students. In our district, we use collaborative online documents so that teachers can share curriculum and share resources, but it doesn't mean that they're not teaching those students themselves.
Just a couple things on that. As far as the drafting, the drafts are already done. The work groups, it's my understanding, looked over the standards themselves. They did not craft the standards. They just they just provided feedback on the work that was already done. As far as being research-based, yes, there are a lot of people that looked and said, yeah, the standards are good. But if you look, only 4 were independent groups. The others were all funded, were special interest groups that were funded by the federal government for standards writing or had special interest in education reform. They would be getting direct compensation from the reform when it was in place. There is a study out kind of discounting that research. The field testing on the assessments in the spring of 2014, the tests that the kids are going to be taking are going to be deciding whether the assessments are valid. It's not going to be discovering how much your student knows like an old MAP test. These are going to be testing the 20,000 assessment items that are out there to see if it's a valid test. That's what's really different about this, is that your kids basically are going to be product development testers that are unpaid, and you didn't give the permission for companies to come in to decide if an assessment was valid or not. You send your kids to school to determine their competency level, and that is not what these tests are going to deliver, and we do have that in writing from DESE, Mr. Michael Monks.
Bill Gates had been interviewed last fall and said, and I can give you the quote, "It'd be great if this education stuff worked, but we won't know for probably a decade." And Mike Cohen, the gentleman I described as the president of Achieve, said that it would take an entire cohort to move from grades K through graduation to know if this had a positive impact. So there are no data about the outcomes of these standards. I think the difference is that in prior versions of standards, because we had state sovereignty, if we had a complaint, we had redress, and we had a way within the state to handle it. These are copyrighted to Washington, D.C. based organizations. They were funded by corporations that had people who were authors sitting at the table. They helped develop the materials sold to the schools to teach the content they helped develop. And those same publishers, Pearson and McGraw-Hill, got the contracts to develop the items for the SBAC and the PARCC tests. Now, in terms of field testing those assessments, New Hampshire, a middle school in New Hampshire, took that test. Nashua, New Hampshire, took the early administration of that test in December. And the teachers found the results unusable because the items themselves were described as being more psychological and sociological than academic. And if you read the year 2 report from SBAC to the U.S. Department of Ed about the progress in the development, what they're going after is not the kind of knowledge base that we're used to, but what they call the infusion of critical abilities into the items, meaning attitudes, values, and mindsets. They're infusing attitudes, values, and mindsets into the test items. So that's why it's called a new generation of testing. The local opt-out, I'm afraid, becomes moot once you start evaluating school districts through MSEP 5, because what's taken into consideration are your students' test scores. And if you're not teaching, if you're off on your own renegade, this is not what I want to do, I'm going to pick out my own content, you're not going to test well, you're not going to score well, and you're not going to look good on the MSEP 5. So it's really not as freewheeling and independent as some would describe. And you can go to a Huffington Post article that was released, I believe, last October. Again, I'm willing to give you any of the references I have. There are descriptions of corporations saying education is the new money pot. Education basically has become the cash cow. That's why the copyright, because they can control it. They can create a homogeneous market base, force down their costs of production, and increase their market share, okay? So that the entrepreneur interviewed in Huffington Post said, look for software to replace teachers, okay? So we're not saying this on our own. We're saying it because we've read Business Review. You can go to Harvard Business Review, and the head of staff for Arnie Duncan wrote in a blog post that this opens new markets for entrepreneurs. She didn't say, this will improve the quality of education.
Thank you. So what I want to just, Mr. Schuler, if you don't mind, just clear up one thing. What we do with testing, before we give a test, we vet the questions, and we've done that for years back into the map. So what your students, if you have students in the system and they're in public education, what your students will receive this year, they will receive a pilot test, some students will, and that will be vetting the Smarter Balanced Item Bank through the Missouri system. And then they will receive the regular MAP test. So your student this year won't be judged, your building won't be judged on the item analysis. They're looking for things like, does one gender heavily score better than another gender? Are the items biased one way or the other? Do the rural kids struggle and it's written better for urban kids? So they're looking at all the demographics of the test to make sure that the questions aren't biased towards one school district, one part of the state, or another. So what your students will take this year is the regular test that we've taken for years. And they were done the same exact way as the one we're doing now, getting ready for the spring of 2015, which will be the first year that test will be given. And the exact same way we vetted all the others in the past are the same way we're vetting this one. So it's the pattern that we followed for 2 decades now in assessment in the state of Missouri. So in regard to MSIP 5, there are some local districts who have decided that we're not going to align our curriculum to Common Core, which is absolutely a local district decision, and they can do that. With MSIP 5, out of your 140 points, 40 of those points are tied to English language arts and mathematics. So potentially, if what you're doing at the local level isn't very good, or what you're doing doesn't somehow align, if the Common Core says kids have to be able to infer, and what you're teaching doesn't have anything to do with making inferences in text, then it won't match up. But because we already know what's in the current state assessment, I think there's going to be a pretty good alignment already. But what you'll see, potentially they could be hurt within that 40-point window. It could go down a little bit. And you would hope then that they would make sure that the instructional strategies they are using, the curriculum that they are writing, matches best practice.
I'd like to speak just a moment to the technology question. One of the quotes was, it would be great to know if this education stuff works, but it will take a decade. So what's the alternative? Do we sit still? Do we do nothing? Or do we continue to press on and try to figure out the best practices for education? I think sitting still is the worst thing that we can do. As educators, we're not made up like that. We're trying to figure out how to improve continually, day after day, year after year. Our teachers are collaborating together. If anyone has a picture of a computer that's going to be teaching a student in Southwest Missouri, I've never seen that picture. That picture is false. What we see is that teachers are arming themselves with the best tools that we can provide for them, and technology is one of them. And my guess is that many of you know that out there right now because you use technology yourself. And we do know that technology, as students progress through and prepare themselves for the outside world, if they are not fluent in technology, they will be behind. They'll be behind at the college level, they'll be behind at the technology level, the technical level, they'll be behind in the workplace. We have to pursue technology as part of this teaching process in order to provide a student that's ready for college and career. If we don't do that, we'll fail those students. That can't happen.
My name is Shane Scholler. I'm the executive director, and I was supposed to be here, but we got held up at our state committee meeting, and our press communication director, Matt Wills, had to go take care of other things. So I apologize, but you're stuck with me now. So going forward, first of all, I just want to thank each of our panelists. We're just a little over midway into our questions here, and we've already got some good discussion going forward. I did want to say, Dr. Medlin, that I have 3 children, and last week or 2 weeks ago I had to put a 1-month sabbatical on technology with my phone because they love to play the games. So anyway, going forward, did your school districts receive state fiscal stabilization funds as a one-time grant? If so, what did you fund, and how is your district preparing to continue funding that expenditure? Dr. Medlin.
We did actually receive federal stabilization money. During that time period, there were significant funds that were directed from the federal government to the local districts. Local districts had the opportunity to make decisions on how to utilize those funds. I can tell you in the Willard School District, we decided to utilize those funds as a one-time project. Many of those funds went to build and construct a special education facility, which we call a transition house. If you come to the Willard School District, close to the high school, there is a home built. It was a collaborative effort. It was built by our building trade students. So our building trade students had the opportunity to be a part of actually constructing a facility on campus. It was designed by students, constructed by students. It was the interior design capability was worked on by our family and consumer science department. And the benefactors are special education students. And what a beautiful team that happened. We saw collaboration happen not only between teachers but between children. And when that happened, our building trades students adopted the transition house as a project, and they still do fishing club experiences on the weekends with those kids, and it is just a beautiful thing. So it was one-time money. We utilized that for a one-time project. We had an incredible outcome, and it's been very positive. We did receive stimulus funds, yes we did.
The question was then about how do you continue the maintenance on the project you built. What the federal government has a habit of doing is incentivizing people by giving them a very small portion of the amount that's required for a project and saying you can have this grant money to do that project. It is a portion of what is needed to actually finish the project, and then you're left holding the bag for the maintenance of it. And that's what's happening with these state fiscal stabilization funds. I can tell you, I attended a board meeting of a local school district that shall be unnamed. But that they had used the funds to, and for a good cause, to pay more teachers for Title I programs. But the money's gone. And now they're trying to figure out, well, how do we continue those programs without additional funds? Do you see what happens in the bait and hook strategy? Okay? That is what happens with unfunded mandates that we've complained about. That's one of the problems, or self-image issues that we have as special educators, is that the federal government passed IDEA and never fully funded it. And so districts and states have been left holding the bag for. So how do we fund all of the programs that get mandated from the feds if we're going to get more money? But the pattern is always, we've got this idea for nudging you into a direction. We'll give you some money to do it. And then you figure it out if you're going to meet our standards for getting more money. That's how they nudge. And so I want you to know that I am personally aware of at least one large district that is trying to figure it out.
I was involved in a small district at the time. I wasn't working at Ozark Schools. Ozark Schools didn't take the bait. We funded one-time projects as well, but at a small school, man, Mary, it was very, very hard not to just want to bite and use that money to fund things. But even at our small district, we realized that if we put it into something that's a reoccurring cost, this is going to bite us hard in the rear end. And so we didn't do that. So I hate for that district they didn't think through that very well. But most Southwest Missouri districts, for sure, as we talked with one another, it's how do you use these funds in a way that doesn't put our taxpayers on the hook later. And I think that's how we looked at all of those.
Key to the discussion, once again, is local decisions. And we support that wholeheartedly. Local decisions is what drove the outcome of those funds. If local decisions were to produce products out of one-time funds, then that was not a problem. If the local decision was to place it onto a salary schedule or hire more teachers, then they had to figure out the outcome once those funds were depleted. But the key point is, it was a local decision that made that happen.
And that's a perfect segue into our next question, which is, when the state adopted Common Core, did we abandon local control? We'll start with this side and then come back over here.
What I did was I took the questions were sent to us in advance, and I asked active classroom teachers to respond to the three questions from the proponents of Common Core. So I want to be the voice of the teachers here. I'm not a classroom teacher, but I will tell you what we said. We didn't abandon anything. The decision was made for us. Local control wasn't lost at the onset, but the mechanism was firmly put in place for that to happen. The mechanism wasn't via the standards themselves, but through the tests. In order for districts to maintain their MSEP numbers, they would have to prepare their students for the tests. Of course, this means that the curriculum would have to be in place to ensure that students would be prepared for those tests. If the students perform poorly on the test, the threat of loss of accreditation looms over the district. Ultimately, we can see where this will go as we have blank city and blank school district as our template. They were major metropolitan area school districts. There was no local control on that issue. A governor appointed a board of education, made the decision without input from anyone. DESE sent emails to a select group of people in 2010 to have them send in support letters. Most were former STAR or Missouri Teacher of the Year recipients. Principals and superintendents, as well as small business owners, were asked to support these standards before they were even finished. The select schools and districts are the same ones who keep testifying for DESE. Same circle. They basically put their stamp of approval on something that no one knew anything about. By the way, such and such districts were DESE work groups through the years. They would give big time support. Now, you should know the difference between the work groups for the standards in Washington, D.C., and the work groups of the state. We have a press release from the National Governors Association saying the work groups in Washington, D.C., which included the ACT, Achieve, and another testing corporation, and College Board. Okay, do you see the corporate influence here? They assigned the members to the work groups that worked on the standards. Then the states had the opportunity to provide feedback on documents already developed by them. All right, so two different meanings to work groups. And the ones we're talking about were sworn to confidentiality as to what happened in the meeting process. Do you see why copyright is such a bugaboo for me? You swear to secrecy and you take public dollars? I don't think so. All right? So, yes, states had an opportunity for input, but after confidential work groups did their work. So that's the loss of local control.
Local control is something that we hold dear. If we don't have local control, then honestly, we are not able to fashion and bring in the values and the character of our own communities. That's something that is hugely important to me. When we start doing things in the Willard district, we make it Willard. We don't make it Springfield. We don't make it, I'm not familiar with any major metropolitan area. That's not Southwest Missouri. Southwest Missouri is a small town. When we look at things, we look at them critically. How do we make them Willard? And then we adjust them, we change them, we tweak them, and we figure out ways how to make them match our community standards, which our communities have standards also that we try to have expectations of meeting. We work very hard at that. So let me speak a couple ways where I believe we did not abandon local control. Number one, we were able to, many times audiences get confused between standards and curriculum. We were able to fashion a curriculum to meet the Common Core standards. Number one, we chose to accept the Common Core standards, to let them be the standards. That was a local decision. Number two, we were able to format our own curriculum and build that curriculum, which we did in-house. We did not go and buy it. We did not go and purchase it. We did not go to a college to say, please give us this curriculum. We did it ourselves. We did it with hard work. We did it with innovation. We did it with skill. And we did it with teachers that understand this process better than anyone. So that was a local decision. And not only that, we created our own assessments then how to measure this between benchmarks. That's the key to continuing to help our students move forward. We have to do that at the local level. Then we created local enrichment opportunities above and beyond, and we created local remediation opportunities for the students that are struggling. Every one of those decisions were made at the local level. The Common Core curriculum gives us some opportunity standards gives us opportunity when we look at collaboration, which is one of the major components of 21st century learning and the 21st century business model. How are we able to talk to other people, other districts? We have to have a common language. Those common standards allow us to have that conversation. Not only that, we're raising our children to operate in a global community. We know that. Interstate community is first. We have to be able to collaborate with other states to say, how can we get better? Give us ideas that you've researched, that you've come up with on your own, at your districts. And we have had those conversations with districts, and we're getting better because of it. Not only that, but how can we make that broader and broader throughout many states? Collaboration is a powerful tool, and Common Core has helped us have a common platform where we can have these conversations not only among districts, throughout our state, and now multiple states.
One of the things that is critically important to the conversation today, as everyone can recognize, is this issue over local control. And I think there's been a lot of information out there that's given the impression that we haven't had a lot of choice, every bit of the choice in what it looks like in our local districts. And as Dr. Medlin said, you know, we have worked very hard to make the best decisions to serve the students of our school district and the students of Missouri. And in working with standards of any kind, those standards have to be informed by local community, state level representatives, national level representatives, and businesses. I can't believe that anyone here would be interested in not hearing from our corporations and our businesses about what they see as the skill set that is needed for kids to be able to work in those jobs whenever they leave their educational experience. So gathering information from all stakeholders is a critical piece to knowing what is best for preparing our students for the future. And it's a critical piece of making sure that not only is the skill set there, but that those kids are marketable and that they can be across the state, across the nation, across the world, because it's important that we fortify them with those skills. So a limited scope, I don't think, is the answer, but at the same time, we take that information and we make it our own. We decide what is best for our students.
I'd like to address a couple of things that have been said. 21st century skills is the buzzword everybody likes to talk about, and it always sounds so impressive in we're global economy, 21st century jobs. I've been looking for a year for somebody to tell me, first of all, what is a 21st century job and what is a 21st century skill? You're going to regret clapping because I'm going to tell you, I think I finally found it. There was a report released by Microsoft last September. They funded a study of 21st century skills. There were 7 of them, and several of them were mentioned today. One of them was collaboration. Collaboration is great. Absolutely, in the business world, you need to collaborate. But I'll tell you a quick story about my husband's company. They provide dental implants, and they use engineers. They love MIT engineers. MIT engineers are some of the best scientific minds that they can have to do the engineering that they need. They are horrible collaborators. They come out of MIT terrible collaborators. But the company takes them on and trains them, and guess what? Even after 16 years of formal education with no collaboration, they can be trained to collaborate. The difference is they spent 16 years competing with their peers, not collaborating with their peers, because they wanted to be the best. That's what made them great MIT engineers. If you start teaching the skills in the wrong sequence, in the wrong order, too early, you will ruin the MIT engineer in favor of the person who works well with other people. They talked about being able to collaborate with other districts. DESE has always had a curriculum department which allowed people to share their lesson plans, their curriculum design, so that if you didn't know how to do it locally, you could go in and seek that information. The U.S. Department of Education has a thing called What Works. Similar idea, you can go in and you can look at what curriculums have worked for other places. That's been available for a while, so Common Core does not offer anything new in those fields. And in terms of making sure that the local districts have control and they can do what they want, our standards are designed to match the NAEP test. That's the National Assessment of Education Progress. By statute, we wrote our standards to be closely aligned to what was in that test. That test allowed states to compare students' performance across states and even within schools. Missouri was ranked number 1 or 2 in all of those standards as done by NAEP. We were the closest aligned of any of the states. We wrote our curriculum to be in alignment with our standards. The districts had the ability to develop whatever curriculum they wanted with those standards aligned to the NAEP. We still score in the middle of the country. So having great standards and being free to do your curriculum is not going to guarantee an outcome. But Common Core is promoted as it's going to guarantee an outcome. This is my problem.
If I could speak to local control just one moment. There's a couple of different kinds of local control. One of them is local control over what we use for instructional material, and that's what we call the curriculum. And I agree with Dr. Byrne, and it's been one of the burning issues inside me, ma'am, with either the Tyler model or if you use Understanding by Design or any of the instructional models, assessments do drive instruction. And so the part that we have had to look at the whole time is how are they creating the assessments? What kind of skills are they looking for? And so we've had to step up our instruction because actually what the assessments, the skills set the kids were going to do wasn't one we were testing very well. They were asking kids to read a couple of different passages and then think across multiple passages and come up with inferences and come up with predictions and come up with an evaluation. That's not what we were typically doing. We were looking at one passage at a time. It was good stuff, but it wasn't enough. So assessment is driving the way that we are also, because we're looking at a different assessment, we are assessing differently now. But we're the ones who are creating the curriculum to match that. And so we decide what text we use. We decide what we teach. We decide how we're going to teach basic math facts and the way we're going to do that, and if we're going to do a spelling curriculum or not. We're in charge of all those decisions. And just to give you an example, you were wondering what 21st century skills were. We hear that buzzword often, and one way the Ozark School District has done that, there is a business in town that is in the health field in Ozark. And what we did, we talked to that business and the owner of that business, and we asked them, what are the skills, as we're looking at our career technical classes, what are the skills that you need to be 21st century skills? So when we graduate Ozark graduates and we want them to raise kids in our community, what will help them in your business? And what he said is what those 7 skills that you read on that report, he said the problem we have is we can get all kinds of engineers, but they don't have the soft skills. As our high school, as the Ozark High School, that's aligned to our business, which is in the Ozark city limits, will you please really work on giving the engineering skills our kids need and follow up with making sure they have really good soft skills? So that, as Dr. Medlin said, that created a conversation. Then we started talking to all of our teachers. What are we doing to ensure kids get good soft skills so they don't waste 16 years? We want them to collaborate from the very beginning and learn those soft skills and learn the engineering. We're expanding our engineering program every single year. Local decision to meet the needs of our community.
Okay. We'd also like to have a couple questions from the crowd. And so, wow, more than a couple. We got about 20 minutes here before the luncheon. At the very back was the first thing I saw earlier. Todd? And yeah, please come forward to the mic. And then Jim, if you want to follow up. We'll try to keep your answers limited on this so we can get through questions. It's the one thing I ask the panelists here is to try to be brief so we can get a few questions in. And please keep your questions to Common Core, because in Kansas City we got off on a few rabbit trails when we did this back in September. So,
if you have Common Core standards that are applied across the country, how can we possibly be competing against each other and wanting our individual children and our individual students in our individual communities to be the very best when everybody has looked at a Common Core standard? It just seems that we want our children to excel above what would be a common.
I'll take a swing at that one. Actually, when you compete, you have a goal, and that has to be measured some way. And so if we're going to have healthy competition, if we're going to do it on the basketball court, then whoever scores the most buckets wins the game. You have to have something like that. So with Common Core, that becomes the playing field. And then how the district performs, utilizing the curriculum that they've chosen to meet those standards, becomes the way that we answer that. I think it can be competitive.
Well, I just have one comment on that. I look at it as a road race. Everybody starts out at the same place, but not everybody reaches the same goal at the same time. And my child's goal may be different from your child's goal, may be different from another child's goal. We cannot guarantee the same outcome.
okay, next question.
I'm Jim Tigert, and I have worked in the administration of higher education for 21 years. And where the control of the education for testing and rules comes from is very important to me. So who's putting the Common Core together? Is that the federal government?
There was no direct involvement in terms of a person at the table who represented the U.S. government, but they collaborated. The U.S. Department of Ed, Arnie Duncan, was guest speakers at the seminars put together by the National Governors Association and heavily funded by Bill Gates. And then what happened, and it's on the paper I gave you, when the players had decided, and what you got to look for is a publication called Benchmarking for Success. The December after Obama was elected, that publication was released. But you don't write and publish something in 2 months, okay? Janet Napolitano was the chair of the committee for Benchmarking for Success. And what it did was basically say, we have an agenda as governors. And on page 31, it says federal role right out at the top. And it says, we are going to create a new historic relationship between the state and the federal government. So what you see is the partnership between the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, and the U.S. Department of Ed. And on that sheet, you see federal role right above his signature. They knew they were doing it, but it violates our Constitution. Nobody came and asked us, do you want a historic federal-state relationship? And they certainly weren't authorized by it in our U.S. Constitution.
So Jim, currently, we have, the Smarter Balance Assessment wrote the questions, and we have taken that question suite, and we have made a contract, and so they're creating tests for Missouri based off of that. So we have bought those questions. If you're just looking at what did we do with the assessments, we've bought the assessment questions or access into that, and we've made our tests based off of those.
Okay.
Good, point taken.
That is
Okay,
correct.
let's
And
move on to the next question.
I have
Jim,
to
please.
answer that.
No,
I have
let's-
to tell you
we gotta
something
keep
very
moving.
important. The
We got to
chief-
keep moving. Let's move to
beg
the
your-
next question.
I'll tell you later.
Sorry, I want to work.
I know.
Ship here.
He looks like a nice man. You know what he told me in Kansas City? He said, Mary, behave. I love him. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I am Dr. James Nolan, 70 years in public education, and when we look at 100 years in education, where my 70 years come in, let me just tell you. I have a baccalaureate degree here from Teachers College at SMS. I have a master's and a doctorate from the University of Missouri. I was on the education committee as 6 years in the state house as a representative, and 8 years, and 8 years as a state senator. Now, I think I may know something about public education and something about government. One of the underlying questions right here today we're dealing with is state rights.
That's right.
We talk about No Child Left Behind, or Obamacare, or special education. Everything that we get from the federal government has a price tag. Now we say, well, we do a better job today. Let me tell you, there's not a man or a woman in that panel, or you, Shane, or I, could pass a 8th grade examination 100 years ago. I guarantee you can't do it. And if you think you can, I want you to look at one time and see. So we made some strides, and I've been part of it. But let me just say to you, we're not going to solve it today, but the least we can keep government, federal government, out of anything that has to do with states. God bless us, has to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Noble. Does anyone have any comments?
I'll make one comment. Dr. Nolan, anybody that has 70 years of educational experience, I just want to congratulate you and shake your hand afterwards.
John Q. Hammond,
clearly fought the
John Q.
battles,
Hammond and I
respect
started
that a
teaching
great
about
deal.
the same time, and when I got back out of service, I'm a veteran of World War II. Not many of you guys here either are veterans of World War II. Veteran of World War II, disabled. But you know what? When I got back, my first year of teaching was in 1948. And then I was elected to the House in 56 and stayed in the Senate till 78. So, till 78. And anyway, I've had a long career, and I tell you, I'm proud of all of you up there. Every one of you are doing a good job. And so keep it up. We need discussion. We need
Thank you,
debate.
Dr. Noble. All right. And thank you for your service. Next.
Hi, yes, my name is Kimberly Benz. I am actually a candidate for school board for Ferguson-Florissant School District in North St. Louis County. And many of you may be aware that our district is neighboring two failing districts that are making statewide news, Riverview Gardens and Normandy. Their test scores are abysmal. And unfortunately, there are schools within our district that are also seeing those type of test scores. I personally could go on and on and on and on about all kinds of stuff, but a couple of points. First of all, we are losing local control. And just with not knowing what's going to be happening in our own district and how many students we may have, depending on transfers and such, that's an example there. But in relation to Common Core, there's two things that I'm really worried about. One is this word rigor. When we already have struggling schools and we already have students having problems with the current curriculum, how are we going to make it more rigorous and yet still have them successful? And the second thing is technology fails. Our school, the elementary school that my kids go to has been a pilot school for Smarter Balanced. And imagine a fourth grader having the system crash on them in the middle of the test. That is what we have had students doing. And so with the already stressful situation of taking tests, because not every student is a test taker, they're going to now be on technology that they may not be familiar with, and then it's going to crash on them. I know adults who have called me up when their computer crashes and they're, what did I do wrong? Why are we adding that extra stressful situation to these kids?
Does anybody have a response?
I'd like to tell you about the word rigor. It doesn't have the same definition we're used to in terms of advanced learning. There's a gentleman who sat on the math education or the math standards committee. His name was Malcolm, and said that rigor doesn't mean analytic thinking the way a mathematician does. Now, did you get that? He's sitting on the math standards committee. Rigor doesn't mean analytic thinking like a mathematician. It means the kind of rigor of preparing for a sport or a profession. And the only thing I can figure out, I do know what it means is word problems. We're going to have you do word problems and apply your computation skills there. But it doesn't mean you'll be progressing towards more advanced math. Jason Zimba, who was one of the chief architects, said, this is for first-year community college. This Common Core math will not prepare you for STEM. Science, technology, engineering, and math. To do that, parents will have to subsidize the math that you learn through Common Core with additional instruction outside of school, which makes it discriminatory for those children who have the ability but won't have access to that tutoring.
Anybody have a response over here?
I'm not sure I quite understood your question, ma'am, but as far as the technology issues that your district may be experiencing, I can't respond to that. The fact that a test may be delivered through technology is not. I don't know how you would like for us to separate that from the Common Core question. If your technology is crashing in your district, that's more of a district issue and not anything to do with Smarter Balanced or the Common Core. Perhaps I'm not following what you were asking.
If through computer is the means by which the students are going to be tested, I know my district is not singled out in this problem, that we've had to do a lot of upgrades, which are very costly, et cetera, in order to get up to par, have the correct bandwidth, have the technology within our schools. And we are working on that, but just technology being what it is, it has the opportunity to fail. And so how are we going to guarantee that we are getting accurate outcomes from these students if they have technology potentially failing while they're taking the test, or even while we're transferring the results to the state, et cetera?
You know, I have to agree with you. The fact is, our technology, we are young in the process of technology, and we are building on that, and we need to get better and better about that. Districts are moving to one-to-one programs. Part of the key is to help those students at a young age. They don't need to meet that technology when they take the test. The technology needs to be part of the learning. Once again, it needs to be incorporated in all of the learning process, so they are not surprised when they get to the test. And as you said, districts that do not have strong infrastructure could be problematic. My iPad this morning went blank, and I had to reboot it in order to make it work. We all experience that. It's not just schools, it's businesses too. Technology is a problem. I bet someone's car had problems this morning also, but some way, somehow got it fixed and came here this morning. It's something that we have to get better at and overcome.
Just to talk about the nuts and bolts of your question, Missouri currently does online testing at the high school level under our current policy and program with the end of course assessments. And the way that structure works is that anytime there would be a glitch in technology or a power outage or thing of that nature, it's a self-saving system. So we have experienced glitches where students, the screen might do something bizarre, and it comes back online, and it's self-saved, and it picks them up right where they left off.
Good.
So that might help.
And we have just a little less than 5 minutes, so the questions can be brief and the responses hopefully brief. We might have time for 2 more, but we only have time for 1 more. Go ahead, ma'am.
My name is Lisa Nash, and I'm from Mount Vernon, Missouri. I've not had only children go through the Missouri public system of my own, but now I'm raising 2 grandsons. And I'm going to tell you, I am not happy. First of all, you talk about loss of local control. You lost local control when you didn't ask the parents about this first. That was the main loss of local control. The second thing is I've gone through conferences with my grandsons for the Common Core. He's not doing too well in math. So I simply asked the teacher, well, what do I need to do to help him? Show me what I need to do. Tell me where I need to go. She sat there with her mouth drooped open. She could not tell me. She said, well, we really don't want him to advance because that would cause a problem. I said, why would that cause a problem? She goes, well, then he wouldn't be like the others. I said, gee, when I was in school, I advanced, they put me in a higher grade. The problem with Common Core, as we all know, whenever you get the federal government involved in anything, it downward spirals. Since 1978, when the Department of Federal Education was developed, scores have continually gone down. Okay? What we want to know as parents is how to get rid of it.
Okay, that's the question. Any response, Dr. Carson?
The answer to that is real simple. Either run for the school board or contact your school board and go through that process.
You can contact your state legislator. As a matter of fact, Senator Lamping's chief of staff is here, and she'd be happy to hear your testimony and take it back to the senator, because we will have 7 bills in the legislature this legislative session to get rid of Common Core, stop the data mining, and change the Missouri Constitution so that your state school board members are elected, not appointed by the governor.
I'd like to respond to that real briefly, and we'll lose local control if that happens. We have had local control to decide if we want to go in that direction. If legislation is passed that we cannot pursue local control decisions to accept Common Core, then that's a step backwards for local control.
Dr. Lilly, last question. Make it quick.
I will make it quick. I would ask everybody in this room, have you served on a school board? Have you run for a school board? Do you attend regular meetings? That is the problem. There is not a lot that do it. Now, DESE, I disagree. I am on the Willard Board of Education. The way that DESE got it in was not completely above board. But I would ask a question. One of the problems, I would ask a question to the educators, how much turnover do you have in the schools? And when you have students coming in from other districts and other states, what kind of problems does that show?
I was down in Hollister for 8 years, and in that 8 years, we had a revolving door. But it was we had between 70 and 80% poverty in the district, and we had one kindergarten class, for an example, who started with 14 kids in August. She ended the year with 15 or 16 kids, and 7 of them were the same ones. And with that kind of turnover, we started Dr. John talking to our other districts around, saying we got to do something so we're teaching somewhat on the same page. Because when they leave me and go to Reed Springs and then go down into Arkansas and come back up to Kirbyville and then back over to Hollister, they have huge holes in their learning. So the one thing about Common is at least we have some standards we can draw a line. It's not perfect, but it definitely helps us with the conversations. How can we rescue the kids who get lost in the cracks?
Okay.
I'm glad he mentioned poverty, because actually nationwide in the K-12 population, only 0.3% actually cross state lines. The high mobility population are children in poverty who typically don't move outside an 11-mile radius from their home. for our initial home. If the people in poverty move about a lot, but usually within the same district and mostly within the same state, so they would have been under the same standards anyway.
Okay. I want to say, before you applause here, let's first of all understand that we have excellent panelists here today, and that this has got to be, in my strong opinion, we have to work together. I see that look, but we do. My children are in the Willard school system, for example. As parents, Frank, I'm grateful to have people serve on the school board. I'm grateful to have the teachers and the administrators working together. As Dr. Brown will tell you, we don't always agree, do we?
That's correct.
But we work through it. And I'm grateful to have people who are taking their time to say we don't necessarily agree, because that's part of what our country is about, is we have the opportunity to stand when we disagree, but we should do it respectfully and understand that they believe in what they're doing and they're doing to the best of their ability, but we have to have an open conversation, which our country, frankly, is getting less and less good about. And we have to be willing to forgive, we have to be willing to listen, and we have to be willing to understand that a lot of times we are pursuing the same goal. We may have a different idea or thought process about how to get there. And at the end of the day, I just want to say to each of you, thank you for being here today. And you do need to be involved in your school board. You do need to be involved in your legislator who's serving in Jefferson City to make sure we're working with them, and your member of Congress. And as we continue forward, we all fully well know that if we need to make a change, for example, No Child Left Behind didn't stay forever. It changed to what we have today. And so we can make change. And I firmly believe that the folks here in this room, with our administrators and our teachers, we will do that if we find things that are not working for the best interest of the children who are in the public school system. And so with that, let's give each of our panelists a round of applause for being here this morning. And with that, our luncheon is going to be beginning next door here, if anybody has tickets to luncheon. And